Hello Internet, today I'm taking a look at the Olympus Trip 35. The Olympus Trip 35 is a Japanese compact automatic exposure camera which was in production from 1967 into 1984, with over 10 million units sold. This camera was intended to be a compact, easy-to-use camera for traveling, hence the name Trip. Let me start by taking you through the different parts of the camera. On the front we've got the fixed 40mm f2.8 Suico lens, and around it we find the selenium cell ring used for metering. Since it's so big, it also powers the meter, so we don't need any batteries in this camera. On the lens we find the controls. Closest to the camera we've got the aperture ring. When left on auto, the camera chooses a shutter speed of either 1/40th of a second or 1/200th of a second. The aperture goes all the way to f22, so you won't have any problems in bright and sunny conditions. If you put the aperture dial on anything but auto, the shutter speed locks at 1/40th of a second, and the camera is essentially expecting a flash to be used. The light meter is still active though, and will step down the aperture if you overexpose. The next dial on the lens is the focus ring. We don't find the usual distance scale, but instead a collection of funny icons. We've got an orange man, him and his mate, a family of ice cream cones, and some mountains. And yes, this focusing ring actually locks in place in steps, making zone focusing your only option on this camera. If we take a look around the bottom of the camera, we find a more sensible distance scale going from infinity to 3 meters, 1.5 meters, 1 meter, and an extra step to 0.9 meters. The final dial on the lens is the Axial filter ring. You turn this to change the ISO speed. On the bottom of the camera we find the film release button and the tripod mount. On the top of the camera we find this nice looking shutter counter and the shutter release button. This one is in chrome, the later versions came with a black plastic button. We also find a hot shoe mount and the film rewind knob, which doesn't open the film door. That's done by this little hinge here. Inside the camera we find a pretty quiet leaf shutter. On the back of the camera we've got the film wind dial and the viewfinder. This is not a rangefinder camera. The viewfinder has no information about the distance to your subject. The viewfinder do however feature a small window in the lower right corner peeking through next to the lens, showing what setting the aperture dial and the focusing ring is currently on. The viewfinder also features a red flag that pops up to inform you that there's not enough light available to take the picture, like a little exposure policeman inside your camera. This only happens when you actually push the shutter button, which also locks up the button. There's no other light meter indicator inside the viewfinder. Now I'll go through the pros and the cons of this camera. I'll start with the cons. You've got no way of knowing if the camera will refuse to take a picture before you actually push the button. You've also got no way of knowing if your subject is in focus. All you can do is average it and hope for the best. You've got basically no manual controls of exposure. And by far the worst thing about this camera is the film wind dial. It sounds like a disposable camera. Now on to some pros about this camera. The shutter counter has a cool Knight Rider look to it. The lens on this camera is surprisingly sharp. The camera body is actually really solid and very light. The camera is a bit larger than the Konica C35, and it's a bit smaller than the Canon ET28. But wait a second, the Canon ET28 shares a lot of the same features as the Olympus Trip 35. They are both compact cameras, both featuring 40mm f2.8 lenses, and they are both automatic exposure cameras with an aperture override for shooting with a flash. So how do they compare? Well, for starters, the Canon is a rangefinder and the Olympus is not. But the Olympus needs no batteries, where the Canon wants outdated replacement batteries causing troubles with the light meter. The Canon is a bit larger but a lot heavier, which in turn makes it feel more solid. And it's got an actual light meter reading even before you press the shutter button. So the Canon must be the winner in this comparison. Well, don't judge a camera by its specifications. The most important thing is how the camera feels, and when I'm shooting with the Canon I feel more limited than with the Olympus. With the Olympus I'm forced to zone focus, so when I move the camera to my eye, it's only to compose the image and to push the button. That makes me free to observe the world instead of fiddling with the camera. The reassuring clunk of the focusing dial, which also bears a resemblance to some plumbing related pipes, lets you focus without even looking at the camera. So while the film winding dial on this camera makes you feel like some pervert stalker with a disposable camera, and the selenium cell looks like some fake diamond jewelry, I find that this little unassuming box not only goes unnoticed by your subjects, but also by yourself. Those are my views on the Olympus Trip 35. My name is Søren. Thank you for watching.